All right, let's jump right into this explainer. Today we're unpacking a massive set of proposals from a recent panel, and the core premise is pretty wild. What if we took private sector principles, specifically the ones driving Silicon Valley tech companies, and hardwired them directly into the federal bureaucracy? It's a sweeping set of ideas, and we're going to break down exactly what this source material entails.
So, it all starts with this core, provocative question. Can the federal government actually operate with the efficiency of a tech startup? I mean, these leaders are arguing that interacting with the government should be just as seamless and delightful as using the Apple Store or booking an Airbnb, rather than wrestling with clunky, outdated systems.
To get there, the panel breaks this whole vision down into four main pillars: upgrading government tech and design, rooting out agency fraud, accelerating the lunar space race, and reshaping global economic strategy. Starting right off with Pillar 1, upgrading government tech and design. And honestly, the sheer scale of the problem here is just massive. The panel estimates we're looking at around 27,000 .gov websites currently out there, and a lot of them, the speakers point out, they're functionally stuck in the 1990s. Believe it or not, some of these government sites actually shut down at 6 p.m. Like, they literally have operating hours coded into them. For a country that leads the global tech space, they argue this is just totally unacceptable. To justify this massive overhaul, they actually look back to the 1970s. Think about President Nixon's push for better design, which gave us the iconic NASA logo, the national parks branding, and even our standardized highway signs. Well, the modern version of this is called America by Design. The goal is exactly the same, but for digital touchpoints. They're actively pulling elite software engineers and designers straight out of Silicon Valley to completely revamp how citizens interact with the state online. And we're already seeing this roll out. They detailed specific platform updates, like recreation.gov for booking your national park campsites, or safety.gov for law enforcement recruitment. They also highlighted new platforms, like trumpcard.gov, aimed at fast-tracking green cards for those with resources, and trumprx.gov, which is a storefront designed to leverage international pricing so Americans can access cheaper prescription drugs directly. The idea is that day-to-day government interactions start feeling a lot more like a polished consumer app. Moving right along to Pillar 2, rooting out agency fraud. The speakers brought up some absolutely staggering numbers when looking at pandemic-era programs. They claim that missing basic guardrails led to an estimated $200 billion in overall fraud. That is a huge number. And it hits hard at the state level, too, specifically citing $9 billion of COVID-era fraud in California and another $430 million in Minnesota. The panel makes the case that this level of unchecked spending is actually a primary driver of the inflation you feel in your wallet today. So what's their fix? Well, proponents are pushing for aggressive private sector-style operational cuts. Over at the Small Business Administration, for example, they highlighted slashing agency headcount by 53% and wiping out $3 billion in unused software seat licenses. On top of that, they're restructuring the $40 billion annual 8A contracting program. The speakers argue this program was improperly exploited by Washington insiders and large corporations acting as pass-throughs, which is exactly why they just launched the first major audit of it in 45 years. Now, the way they're conducting this audit is pretty fascinating. They're using advanced AI tools, specifically mentioning Palantir, but they aren't letting the AI make the final call. Instead, it's a three-step process. Step 1, identify the anomalies. Step 2, let the AI map out these incredibly complex fraud networks and hidden connections across different government programs. Then, Step 3, bring in human judgment to overlay those AI findings against statutory rules to actually confirm the fraud. It's a high-tech approach to a very old bureaucratic problem.
That brings us to Pillar 3, accelerating the lunar space race.
There is a lot of deep frustration expressed here over recent bureaucratic delays at NASA. The speakers contrast the Apollo era of the 1960s, where we saw a rapid launch cadence of just 3 to 4 months, against the sluggish 3.5-year gap between recent early Artemis missions. They argue that when you wait years between launches, the teams literally lose their muscle memory. The proposed solution? Aggressively compress that timeline down to a launch every 10 months, with a hard target of landing on the moon by the end of 2028. And as this quote from the panel really drives home, this isn't just about going back for a photo op with rocks and flags. The stated goal here is to establish a permanent lunar economy. We're talking about building a moon base to actually harvest lunar ice, extracting hydrogen and oxygen to fuel future missions. They are looking at the moon entirely as a proving ground and a vital resource refinery that we absolutely need before we can successfully send humans to Mars.
But here's the catch. How does NASA pull top engineering talent away from highly lucrative private companies like SpaceX or Blue Origin? Well, the speakers argue NASA has to pivot and focus exclusively on near-impossible government-level tasks that the private sector just can't do right now. The prime example they give is deploying nuclear power and propulsion in space. By tackling these monumental, foundational challenges, NASA retains the best minds while leaving lower orbit logistics to the private sector.
Finally, let's look at Pillar 4, reshaping global economic strategy. Okay, let's talk about PASALICA. This is a newly formed economic security coalition mentioned in the sources, currently making up 14 countries. The whole goal is to counter adversarial foreign powers, specifically China's Belt and Road Initiative, by building highly efficient industrial zones with global partners. They call this a product-driven approach, basically creating environments where private companies can securely build out their supply chains, starting with a flagship economic security zone over in the Philippines. Running parallel to this coalition is the DFC, or the Development Finance Corporation. The speakers frame the DFC as the U.S. government's international deal team. They manage a $25 billion authorization meant to mobilize private capital. But the real mindset shift here, they have a strict mandate to treat foreign aid not as charity, but as strategic investments intended to deliver actual financial returns for the U.S. taxpayer, all while securing our foreign strategic interests. To back this up, the panel completely recontextualizes history. You know, when we think of ideal foreign aid, the post-World War II Marshall Plan usually comes to mind as pure altruism. But the speakers emphasize that 70% of those funds actually flowed straight back into purchasing American goods and services. It was essentially a massive economic stimulus for the U.S. economy, and that is exactly the model they want to replicate now to optimize your overall tax footprint. Their philosophy on the global stage really boils down to this concept. They want to replace what they call paternalistic foreign aid, where money is just handed out without expectations, with strict, metrics-driven business partnerships. True development, they argue, happens when you demand skin in the game from developing nations and when you actively export American frameworks like the free market system, the rule of law, and property rights. So as we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with a final thought to chew on. We've just covered some sweeping proposals that touch literally everything from your campsite bookings to lunar mining and global trade. But ultimately, what are the long-term consequences of running our public sector bureaucracy with the aggressive metrics-driven ethos of a Silicon Valley tech company? Does it finally bring that much-needed efficiency and innovation to Washington? Or does treating citizens and allies purely as consumers and business partners fundamentally change the very nature of public service? It's a massive structural shift, and definitely one we'll be watching closely. Thanks for joining me today.